The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Prominent historian Dan Rodgers has some good news among the election wreckage. The Republican Party is a fragile alliance, and Democrats can exploit it. With a cabinet of the stupendously rich, Patriotic Millionaire Chuck Collins argues that income inequality is bad for everyone, them too. And Bernie Sanders supporter Larry Cohen tells Bill Press about the future of a new PAC called Our Revolution. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Prominent historian Dan Rodgers has written a provocative essay called What Next for Liberalism? The answer, he says, is infiltrating state and local governments to undo the gerrymandering and everything else Republicans have accomplished state by state. And we say hello to Dan Rodgers, history professor emeritus at Princeton University, also the author of the book Age of Fracture, which is a history of ideas and culture in our times. Also, author of a recent article asking, what next for liberalism? Dan Rodgers, thanks so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
And it's nice to have you with us. You know, you say the election was decided by white men who had a sense of being outsiders in their own land. But wasn't there a strong element of racism, misogyny, nativism, all of which we thought we were beyond?
Sure. We shouldn't have thought we were beyond strong elements of nativism and misogyny and xenophobia and the rest. They've been part of American past for a long, long while, and they're still here. And one of the things that the Trump campaign did in spades was to reactivate them. Reactivate them partly by taking latent things that people in the United States had thought, some, and also by fanning the fuels of racism, which Donald Trump certainly did. And so it's true that we've got a set of Americans, some of whom had voted for Obama, some of whom would deny that they're racist at all, but their sense of having a grievance against an America that had paid no attention to them brought out a kind of latent, or sometimes a really quite vocal and virulent racism. The question is, what are we going to do? And I think Democrats, at their peril, write this set of Trump voters off and just say they're beyond conversation, they're beyond conviction, they're beyond alliances on the things that we share. That's what worries me about the characterization of all Donald Trump voters as simply racists who've come out of the closet.
Well, that's what I wondered. It just seems like for the loudness of it all of a sudden it's just, my gosh, where did this come from? It's probably been there all along, and he just overturned a rock.
Well, that's partly true, and we Donald Trump and his campaign staff really blew hard on the embers under that rock. But it's also true that the Trump coalition was a very complicated one, and the people who get in the headlines, the ones who speak most loudly and the journalists pick up most quickly on, don't necessarily speak for them all. And I think we have to remember that there are a lot of Trump voters who are still strong members of evangelical churches. There are others who are just simply old-fashioned Republicans who've been voting for the Republican Party forever and are not going to change. And as I say, there's some who had voted for Obama with enthusiasm 4 years ago and 8 years ago. And we have to sort out the most virulent and the loudest voices from all the rest.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this as the end of liberalism, or can the Sanders-Warren wing of the Democratic Party rescue the progressive outlook?
Well, the Warren-Sanders wing has already done a great deal to change what we think of as the center of Democratic Party ideas and policy, and that's good. That the question about inequality simply wasn't on the Democratic Party radar 2 years ago in the way that it is now. In the same way, the question about the need for more stringent, more aggressive, and more intelligent regulation of corporations, that's grown inside the Democratic Party. And then finally, that lure of market-based social policies that Bill Clinton was so drawn to. Maybe we could do health care by a very, very complicated set of market exchanges, et cetera. This is no longer in the center of the Democratic Party agenda, and that's due to Sanders and due to a lesser extent to Warren, and that's a good thing. But will that rescue the Democratic Party? I think what most people say about the Trump voters is they actually didn't care about policy in the way that we imagined they should have, that we imagine that people do when they get the voting booth. They didn't line up the opinions or the predictions or the promises that Trump had made, and many of them now say they really didn't believe them. But they liked something about that larger story that Trump was telling them and the way it connected with their lives. And so if the Democratic Party is going to be rescued, it's got to be rescued not simply by a new set of policies, but by a new story about who they are and why they're important for America, and why that story connects with the lives of most Americans, not just a few.
Well, and Trump got a lower percentage of votes than losers Mitt Romney, John Kerry, George W. Bush, Al Gore. How do liberals apply their 2 million or so vote presidential majority into policy?
Well, that is going to be extremely hard, Jim. They got 2 million votes, yes, and that's a good thing, but they lost dramatically. I don't think one can really understate this. We all assumed that at least the Senate was going to stay in Democratic, or come to Democratic hands. The presidency would stay in Democratic hands. We knew the House wasn't going to, and so we were looking at another 4 years of stalemate, and imagining how one might make the best of that. But this is defeat. It's defeat at the national level. It's defeat at the state level, and so that's part of why, as we'll talk about later, I think the focus of Democratic politics has to move to the states. It's got to move to the cities, not completely, but the idea that there are going to be gains at the Washington level, I think that's a very, very slim hope.
We're speaking with Dan Rodgers, history professor emeritus at Princeton University, also author of the book Age of Fracture, and also the author of a recent article asking what next for liberalism. And Dan, should liberals try to win back the industrial states, or is there any hope of expanding in the traditionally red states, when Trump proves to probably fail these people?
I think both, Jim. I think that most of these either-ors that I know the folks inside the Democratic Party are debating about very intensely these days, most of these either-ors, the answer is both. The Democratic Party has made inroads into formerly red states, Virginia, North Carolina. There are a lot of Democratic voters in Texas, even if they can't win the Electoral College vote in Texas. Wherever there are cities, we discover now there are liberal voters. At the same time, the surprise of this election obviously was the loss of the industrial Midwest, and so that's got to be rebuilt. The Democratic majority is there, and the creation of new Democratic majorities in some of those more urbanized red states, that's got to happen too.
Do you think Democrats should mimic what Republicans did and get billionaires to finance a takeover of state houses so that we can end gerrymandering?
Well, I don't know that the billionaires are going to do it for the Democrats, but the hidden defeat of progressive politics was, in fact, at the state house level, and it was precisely through the using of relatively small amounts of money to shift those elections enough that the new redistricting has meant that the Democrats are, for the moment, a permanent minority, and that's got to be reversed, and it can only be reversed at the state level. Whether gerrymandering is ever going to end, most likely thing is that the progressives will gerrymander for their own benefit. it would be wonderful if we didn't imagine that every 4 years we would have essentially a fight over the rules so that the winners take even more of the goods than they've got already. It'd be nice if we could imagine a politics beyond gerrymandering, but for the moment, it's more important to try to undo what the Republican state legislatures have done, and that's an absolute priority.
What specifically, Dan, could newly energized liberals do to influence state and local policy? I mean, is it just things like minimum wage, abortion rights, voting rights? Are there other items there that I might have missed?
Those are really important, Jim, because most, when we think about it, most of what actually affects daily life of most Americans happens at the state level. What's going to happen in the world is anybody's guess, and we can worry about that. Very little that we can do about that at the local level. But there's not only minimum wage, there's all kinds of other employment rights, family leave policy, the rights of temporary workers, hugely the rights of organized labor to organize and press for better wages and better working conditions. That's all at the local level. There's refugee sanctuary policies, which cities and states are talking about. There's the question of policing and race, which is huge. And it's all going to be resolved finally at the local level of cities and states above all. There's public schools. Are we going to keep them? In the face of the new nominee for the education secretaryship, who seems to want to let everybody have whatever education they want to pay for, so that public education would essentially disappear. That's going to be fought out at the state level and at the local level. Medicaid is a state project. Most of public welfare is a state project. Gun control, voting rights. I think there's a huge amount of work that can be done and needs to be done there. Maybe more important work than Congress is going to do for the next 4 years.
If Congress can get any work done in the next 4 years.
Well, the danger, actually, that's what I thought I might be saying, but the danger is they might get a lot of work done in the next 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And, now, along those lines, can Chuck Schumer keep things at a minimum? Chuck Schumer and the rest of them. Yeah. I just point to him since he's the Senate leader now. I mean, can he? Is there enough that he can do, along with other Democrats, to at least keep some of what could be coming at bay?
Well, yes. How successful it's going to be is anybody's guess, and one has to wish him all the best and a lot of luck in addition. Clearly, there's the filibuster. Though the filibuster is not as solid as we might think it is, but still, he'll use it effectively, and the other Senate Democrats will use it effectively. My own sense of things, though this may be more optimistic than is justified, is that the Republican Party is a pretty fragile alliance at this moment. That clearly the core of the established congressional Republican institution did not want Donald Trump, and they disagreed deeply with Donald Trump about a lot of the things that he seems to stand for, as far as one can tell from day to day. It's an alliance of free market ideologues, small business and large business people who are not necessarily as committed to free markets as the Paul Ryans are, and the traditional moralists who actually don't care very much about the economic issues, but care tremendously about the traditional family and the siege that they think it's under. So it's ripe for splitting. It's never made sense that it's a unified party. And it could be that if the Democrats are really lucky and Trump plays his hand badly, they could, for example, get a victory out of the stimulus bill. It's possible they might get some victories in some of the other places, like the family leave policies that Trump's daughter has championed. And I think they ought to seize on those, make life difficult for the Republican Party establishment.
Okay. Well, we can only hope. Dan Rodgers, history professor emeritus at Princeton University, author of the book Age of Fracture, joining us today on americansdemocrats.org. Dan, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it and look forward to having you back again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Millionaire for Justice Chuck Collins says charities like the Gates and Clinton Foundations are simply tax avoidance strategies that do not necessarily promote social justice. Liberals, he says, need to organize the money on their side. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Perk up, people, for I bring you tidings of great joy. Governor Oops is back. Yes, Rick Perry, the former Texas governor who specialized in putting the goober in gubernatorial, is being brought back from well-earned obscurity in rural Texas to join the menagerie of characters in The Donald Show. For us lovers of low political comedy, Perry is literally an early Christmas gift from on high. Not from heaven, not that high, but from the dizzying heights of Trump Tower. That's where the orange-haired impresario-in-chief has been holding tryouts for his Washington cast, and Perry is a slapstick perfect choice for Trump's bizarre cabinet. Who can forget Perry's classic oops moment during his first failed run for the White House? Campaigning as a far-out right-wing slasher of government services, he boldly declared in a televised debate that, by gollies, he would eliminate 3 federal agencies entirely, dramatically reeling off the names of his 3 victims, the Department of Commerce, Department of Education, and alas, as the national TV audience watched in horror, Rick's brain just could not recall the 3rd federal department he planned to kill off. He was roundly ridiculed as being dumber than a dust bunny. But now, proving once again that being even quasi-smart is not a requirement for getting a high political job, Perry has been hired by Trump to be our next Secretary of Energy. Yes, that is the very agency that was 3rd on the Goober's elimination list. He is actually being appointed to head the $32 billion department he could not name during the 2012 presidential race. This is Jim Hightower saying, here's another comic twist in Rick's appointment. While briefly running for president again this go-round, Perry assailed Trump as a, quote, barking carnival act. And now he's a tail-wagging dog in Donnie's Carnival.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Chuck Collins is a millionaire, an heir to the Oscar Mayer fortune. He's been working most of his life on progressive policy change and reducing income inequality. He says an unstable economy hurts the rich as well as the poor. And we say hello to Chuck Collins, who's a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., where he directs the program on inequality and the common good. An expert on income inequality in the U.S., he is also the author of a new book called Born on Third Base. Chuck Collins, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to America's Democrats.
Oh, absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you with us. You know, you make the argument that too much income inequality is bad for the rich as well as the poor. How do you explain that, especially to rich people?
Well, it sounds odd, but there's a growing body of evidence that shows as we pull apart as a society, as our sort of civic connections become more frayed and strained, that where we're going is bad for everybody. It's going to undermine democracy, the stability of the economy. Too much inequality is bad for everybody, including the rich. And I basically make that case. My book, Born on Third Base, is sort of gives me a platform. I'm out talking to everybody, but I'm also talking to, audiences of very, very wealthy people. And I say to them, look, what kind of society do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a Brazil where the wealthy live behind walls and you send your children to school with bodyguards? Because we are, without changing course, if we stay on the same course, we're heading to economic and racial apartheid. And that's not a society you want to live in. That's not where you want your children to grow up.
If you would, you have good reason to and a good place to stand and talk to these folks. Give us a little bit of your background, if you would.
Yeah, I grew up in the 1%. I grew up in a wealthy community in suburban Detroit. I'm the great-grandson of the meat packer Oscar Mayer. My dad used to say bringing home the bacon means something very different in our family. But I also have, I gave away that wealth when I was 26, and I've been for 30 years kind of campaigning on these issues of income and wealth inequality, working with low-wage workers. So I sort of feel like I do sort of bridge that experience. I understand how labor and workers think, and I understand how wealthy people think. And, my book is basically saying, look, wealthy folks, come on home, rejoin the country, rejoin the community, bring your wealth, pay your taxes, and let's all put our shoulders to the wheel to reduce these extreme inequalities, which are bad for everybody.
You talk in your book a lot about class warfare, but it goes both ways, does it not? The rich keeping the poor down and perhaps the poor unfairly attacking the rich?
Yeah, I mean, the most insidious class war is the class war of top down. As Warren Buffett says, we have a class war in America, and my class is winning. So I think we obviously want to, stop the sort of worst excesses of predatory capitalism that are, looting our communities and workers and the like. My point is that in that struggle, as we do these campaigns, let's not fall into the trap of just attack and shame and sort of the class war, because there are a lot of allies out there. Most social change movements in the United States have had, people from the 1% behind the scenes, et cetera, helping boost those movements. There's always going to be sort of an unreachable rich who are going to use their wealth and power to get more wealth and power. But we shouldn't forget that there are people who are waiting to be tapped and invited to join our social movements, to join our efforts, and who really want to live in a much more egalitarian society.
We're speaking with Chuck Collins, senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, also the author of a new book called Born on Third Base. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously wrote, Chuck, that the very rich are very different than you and me. But you say they are no different. How can they not be different?
Well, they are different and they have more money. And with money comes a socialization that I think disconnects people from the daily struggles that most people feel, that kind of isolates and disconnects. I even recently read a biography of Michael Jordan, who didn't grow up wealthy, but he became very, very wealthy. And he described how his world kept shrinking, how he couldn't trust people, how he became fearful as he became more and more wealthy. So I think it's just important to realize wealthy people they're not a different species. Many of us, anyone listening, if they saw their fortunes dramatically shift, might adopt some of the sort of odd-looking behaviors that we sort of see among the wealthy. Pulling back, inability to share, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the point of the book, is let's just take an empathetic look at everybody here, including those who we tend to think have everything they want.
Donald Trump claims that only a successful businessman like himself can run the government. Apart from his craziness, is there an argument to be made to draw more of our leaders from the business world?
Well, I think we should have leaders from every sector. It'd be great to have people who are workers and nurses and the like. And having worked in the private sector, I think there probably is some value to having elected officials who understand what it's like to have a small business or run a company and the accountability that's involved in that. But being an elected official is being a steward of the public sector. It's managing a commonwealth of things that we all hold together, and that's a very different set of skills or a different mindset. So I don't think the simple applying business skills to the government is solely what it's about. It's a much bigger project in many ways.
One of your goals is to get big money out of politics, but what if progressives approached politics the way the Koch brothers do, especially at the local level? Certainly there are a lot of very rich liberals.
Yeah, and there are countervailing networks to the Koch brothers of wealthy donors and the like, and I think we definitely need to organize ourselves and organize people with money to be effective, both supporting local organizing, campaigns, and elected officials and the like. And so some of that's going on. You have to admire the Koch brothers for their level of organization. I mean, not only do they have a lot of money, but there is some institutional strategy there that I think our side is a little more fragmented. So yeah, I think we need to organize the money. We need to organize politics. It's not just about getting money out of politics at this point, although that would certainly level the playing field.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about some of the big international charities, the Gates Foundation, Clinton Foundation, for example. Are they doing it the right way? I mean, what is the proper way for charity to work?
Well, we've had about a century of charity in this country, and there's a lot of examples of good work that's been done. But I have to say I'm very suspicious of what I would call the charitable industrial complex as a force for good right now, partly because you see every billionaire now is creating their own foundation, funding their pet projects, and they're reducing their taxes by doing that. So more and more philanthropy is part of a larger tax avoidance strategy. Secondly, some of that funding is actually worsening inequality. So it comes back to the basic principle: charity is not a substitute for justice. It's not a substitute for paying your fair share of taxes. Taxes pay for infrastructure. Taxes pay for all kinds of things that charity isn't going to pay for. And we as taxpayers subsidize that charity. When a billionaire makes a contribution to his alma mater, you and I are chipping in, about half of that in the form of lost tax revenue. So we have a justifiable interest in what these charities are doing, and basically reducing it and saying, look, pay your taxes.
So if they do a little bit of good, they basically can get away. Well, I won't say with murder, but they get away with whatever they want as far as the taxes and money, and it's almost like it's a shell game.
It becomes another one of the tax avoidance shell games. I mean, here's an interesting example. Let's say I have $1 billion, or you have $1 billion. We create the Jim Cuddy Foundation, and you can take, you have to pay out 5% of that every year, but you can, use some of that for your office overhead, and you can hire your kids to work in the office, and not a lot of money necessarily is getting out on the street, and yet we've just reduced your taxable wealth by $1 billion, and it sits in a bank account. It's essentially warehoused, and maybe you give it to your favorite, your high school, or you give it to these charities. That's fine. If somebody wants to give their money away without taking a tax break, it's their business. But if they're taking a tax break, that's when we, the public, have a legitimate interest in knowing, is that really serving the public good? And too often, it's not.
Mm-hmm. And especially when they're doing it because they're getting the tax break, not for any other reason, too. And it's hard not to be suspicious of that.
Yeah, no, there's too much now of what I would call tax avoidance charity, and that's a problem. People create these donor-advised funds at Fidelity. The Fidelity Investments is the biggest charity in America after the Red Cross, and that's money that's sitting in these accounts. There's no oversight. And, some of it trickles out over time, but people treat it like it's another investment asset. So they shouldn't get a tax break for that.
Absolutely. Chuck Collins, senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, where he directs the program on inequality and the common good, and he is the author of a new book called Born on Third Base. Chuck, as always, we appreciate your time with us today and look forward to having you back here on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks, Jim.
You're quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Larry Cohen, the head of the Political Action Committee, Our Revolution, talks with Bill Press about what the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party is planning.
The man who is leading Bernie Sanders' team and Our Revolution, chairman of the board of Our Revolution, our good friend Larry Cohen, former president of the Communication Workers of America, up early this morning and at it.
Always up early.
Hey, Larry, you're looking good.
Yeah, right.
This is a very exciting time. I mean, Our Revolution, I've said other presidential candidates, some didn't even try, some have tried to form an organization to continue their agenda. I think if anybody can pull it off, Bernie Sanders can, with all the support that he had around the country. How's it going?
Great. We did a live stream last night with Bernie introducing Keith Ellison, running for Democratic Party chair. 200,000 people watched.
That's
we
great.
did it at the American Federation of Teachers, packed room. Very exciting, as you said. Sobering time on the one hand, with what might be the worst president ever, but on the other hand, it's a time to stand up and fight back, and people are doing it.
So Bernie had something like 8 million contributions from 2.5 million contributors, if I recall. Is that the right?
Yeah, that's close.
Around,
2.5 million contributors, $250 million.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the number of contributions, but yeah.
But how? So I was just wondering about, with this vast support that he had among the American people, have they now are signed up for our revolution? Continuing
they have not all signed up, shockingly, but many have signed up. Lots are active. Over 600,000 signed petitions so far for Keith Ellison, which we will split up by states. So, for example, 100,000 from California alone, and we'll say to the state party chair, okay, which side are you on? You're going to stand with 100,000, and it'll grow quickly, 100,000 or more people? Are you going to be part of the old guard, just following along the W. Wasserman Schultz trajectory as Democrats plunge into the basement across the country?
All right. So you've touched on both things. I want to ask you about two big issues, and they're related, obviously. One is, what do you tell all the Bernie Sanders supporters? How do we progressives react to the incoming Trump administration, number one? And two, how do we recharge, rebuild, redirect the Democratic Party? As I say, they're very related. But let's start with, what do progressives do about this Trump? You see, as I mentioned at the top, appointing all these oil and gas people in charge. Everything we care about, he's got people going in the opposite direction. What do we do?
Right. So I think it's a combination of resistance, which is, somewhat complex. It ranges from sanctuary and actually protecting each other, not self-defense, I like to say, mutual aid. If we wait and they come for people one at a time, we'll all go down the drain. So what does mutual aid mean? Whether it's unions under attack, and unions will get blistered right off the bat here. There's 2 vacancies on the NLRB. He gets control immediately. Whether it's immigrants, people of the Muslim faith, LGBT or transgender, what does mutual aid mean? How do we defend each other? But also stay on offense. What is our vision that we heard in the Bernie campaign? How do we deal with the worst inequality ever in the richest country in the world? How do we stay on the attack in terms of expanding Medicare, not just resisting cuts, expanding opportunities about higher ed instead of the $1 trillion in student debt growing to $2 trillion? So staying on offense, but also not taking our eye off the kind of resistance and mutual aid, collective self-defense sanctuary that we will need when he attacks us.
And what's the venue? Is it Congress? Is it state legislatures? Is it local government?
All. So, all right. It's definitely all of those. So this notion of sanctuary or building bases around the country is definitely local government. So even in this election, lots of examples from the Our Revolution ranks, people getting elected. Chris Schwartz in Blackhawk County Supervisor, or just yesterday, Julie Nitsch in Austin, Texas, won a runoff for Board of Trustees, Austin Community College. So I think, there are places like this where we can build out, and those people have great vision in terms of what they can do where they live. But also back here, it'll be more of putting forward an alternative vision, like on infrastructure, not, as you said, a fossil fuel infrastructure, which is what Trump will bring, but instead infrastructure based on a green economy, the same kind of vision that a Bernie or even a Hillary Clinton would have fought for had they been president. So I think we have to do both. Here's our vision. Keep organizing around it on a national level, but on a local level, people can govern. In some cities and towns, we should look for those and we should build out.
So you're saying that even with Trump in the White House, Republicans in control of the House and the Congress and most governorships, there are still opportunities.
Yeah, huge opportunities, all over the country. We have to look for those. And your second question, in the Democratic Party.
Right.
So one of the things Our Revolution is doing is helping people take over precinct chairs. So right now in Florida, the deadline is today. There's thousands across the country of open precinct seats. Basically, you can sign up and you'll be the precinct chair, and then you get involved on the county level. So reorganizing the Democratic Party from the bottom at the same time that we fight for Keith Ellison at the top. And we're actually better because of the way the party is structured. I am a delegate, a DNC member, and have been there for 12 years. But because of the way it's structured, the real path to change is at the precinct level, and then the county level, and then the state level. And then we change the DNC. Hopefully, Keith, we can also elect Keith along the way. As I said, 600,000 people have already signed up for Keith, and we're going to take those names and that support to every state chair.
Right. Today, it's good that you're here today, because today, Keith Ellison, who was the first one out there, certainly the front runner, co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, big supporter of Bernie Sanders. We support Keith Ellison. But he's going to get a big challenge today. Labor Secretary Tom Perez is going to announce that he's going to run against Keith. Why?
Well, that's the question I asked in a column published yesterday. Why would he run? Because he's certainly not running to say, hey, I'm the more progressive candidate. He's obviously going to run to the right of Keith Ellison. We want him to own that if he's actually going to announce that he's running today rather than exploring it. We want him to own why he's doing that, so that some of the donors that spoke out against Keith, like Sabin, they'll be happy to see Tom Perez. We're not happy. We don't think the donors like Sabin should have much of a voice in this party. They should be, like the rest of us, an active citizen, that the amount of money you give shouldn't control the party. Again, I've been on there for 12 years. I'm sick and tired of it. That's what I've seen for 12 years. It's all about finance. It's all about rich donors. It's all about candidates that'll fund their own elections. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's what's wrong with this Democratic Party. Either it changes now or it risks any kind of viability going forward.
Is this a rift between the Sanders wing of the party now and the Clinton-Obama wing?
I don't think it's exactly that. Lots of unions. We were at AFT last night where we broadcast. Randy Weingarten kicked off that event. She was obviously a core supporter of Hillary Clinton,
yes,
and
right.
now of Keith Ellison. The same thing with AFSCME, and most unions are supporting Keith. So that's one example.
Lee Saunders, president of AFSCME,
Correct.
supported Hillary. I think they were the first union. No, AFT was the first.
Yeah.
But AFSCME was early on with
Early
Hillary.
on, not quite.
Right. And now supporting Keith Ellison.
Correct.
Right. So,
And it's not just the unions. Chuck Schumer, who was a core supporter of Hillary Clinton, core supporter of Keith Ellison. Mayor de Blasio announced yesterday that he's supporting Keith Ellison. Elizabeth Warren, who stayed neutral, supporting Keith Ellison. There's quite a list.
right. But I guess you'd have to say, I mean, Perez is a progressive, right? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a progressive. He's not done grassroots party work in the way that Keith Ellison has. He did get elected Montgomery County Council. As I said in my column, he was an excellent labor secretary. But the point is, do we want change or continuity? Obviously, he has to run as continuity. He was a supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Most Democrats abhor the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We celebrated its defeat while he was continuing the campaign for it. So really, it's a matter of visuals. Do we want more continuity? The White House has run that party for 8 years. This president's beloved by me and others, but frankly, he ran the party into the ground. The DNC is all but dead. And we need a new DNC. We need a symbol of real change. That's Keith Ellison.
All right. Now, let's say we've got Keith Ellison, head of the DNC. What changes do you think we need to see in the Democratic Party to reflect more of what you and I think the Democratic Party ought to be all about?
Yeah, number one, not in a symbolic way, but in a real way, open, transparent discussion, debate, no more of the... all the way to the top at the DNC level. Again, I've been there 12 years. The only time any of us got to speak is when we literally took the microphone and demanded it. We marched to the microphone and took it over. There has not been one opportunity for anybody to comment on a single thing on the 12 years I've been there. There's been no transparency about the elections. The structure of the party needs to change. I'm the vice chair of what will be starting up soon, the Unity Reform Commission, which is to look at the party. And obviously I'm on there solely because of Bernie Sanders. It was a convention resolution agreement in Philadelphia instead of a floor fight on the rules. But from the rules of the party at the national level, how presidents get nominated, to how the party operates in Florida, for example, where they're reorganizing now. Disgrace is the only word I could use to describe what's going on in Florida, how they organize. It's totally obscure, no transparency. We need to change that in every state, in every county. We need to say to the ward bosses, your day is over. The people of this country, young people, they need to believe that they can come in and play a role in this party now, not that they wait and wait and wait.
How about closed primaries?
Closed primaries is another problem. I mean, that's now you're into a long conversation for me.
I know,
but it's a whole. I mean, yeah, how presidents get nominated is a gigantic problem. The New York primary, you had to be a registered Democrat 195 days before the election. 195 days was Halloween, and yeah, it was a scary holiday and trick or treat. But that's not the way that the New York primary should run. And young people thought they were eligible to vote for Bernie Sanders all over New York State. It turned out they weren't.
Yeah, I forget how many hundreds of thousands of voters at the time. No, I don't see how any Democrat, any progressive certainly can defend a closed primary.
Well, it goes on and on. The Iowa caucus. I mean, it was basically a tie, but we really won that, the Bernie Sanders side. You couldn't get a count. The count doesn't exist, except the state party chair had the count of, I forget how many, 1,666 caucuses, 99 counties. You couldn't get a count of how many people showed up in any of the rooms, and it was based on those counts that the county convention delegates were then decided. Again, it's a process that you couldn't invent, except we already have it.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Daniel Rodgers, Chuck Collins, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.